Hello and welcome back. This is Scott, and this week we're going to talk about Monopoly. So last week we talked about perfect competition, where everything worked out magically perfectly, and now we're going to take the other extreme. It's the exact opposite, where we don't have a lot of competition. Matter of fact, Monopoly, just like the board game Monopoly, you want it to be the only seller, the only person with land. Monopoly, there's really no competition. There's only one player. So we're going to talk about what's the theory of Monopoly, what are the assumptions, how does the price and output compare, and right now everything is going to be benchmarked against best case scenario, which is perfect competition. We're going to be talking about price discrimination. We're going to first start talking about a single price monopolist, where the monopolist charges everyone the same price. And then later we're going to talk about a discriminating monopolist, where they divide the population into different groups, like senior citizens and student discounts. And they may be the only seller, but they're going to divide it up and charge different prices to different people. We're going to talk about the efficiency and comparison to surplus to perfect competition. So in perfect competition, the entire theory was based off of 4 assumptions. In Monopoly, we're going to be talking about 3 assumptions. We're going to be talking about that there's just one seller. There are no close substitutes that exist. If there were close substitutes, I wouldn't really view it as having just one seller. And then there are high barriers to entry and exit. Again, the barriers is what's going to determine what happens in the long run. So if we're going to be talking about a monopoly, the logical place to start is why is there only one seller? Why don't other people enter? So let's just get to the barriers to entry right away. So there are 3 different types of barriers. There are legal barriers, economies of scale, and exclusive ownership of resources. Within those types of categories, we're going to explain some examples of what those mean. So there are 3 types of legal barriers. The first is a public franchise. A public franchise is just when the government says we're going to allow one firm to dominate this industry and no one else can enter. So for example, the US Postal Service has a public franchise on first class mail. So if you think about it, UPS or FedEx, they have that distribution network. They would love to get first class mail, but there's a law in place that says, nope, you're not allowed to enter that market. As a result, the US Postal Service has a public franchise and a legal monopoly on first class mail. Another reason why there may be a legal barrier is a patent. So if you think about a patent is granted to a firm that put in money for research and development to develop a new product. So why would the government allow that? Well, the answer is pretty simple. What would be my incentive to spend a lot of money on research and development if as soon as I develop it, other people get to use it and they are going to take away and compete away my profits? If I don't have time to recoup my research and development, I'm not going to spend time on research and development. So patents are there, which provide a temporary monopoly. Then there's government licenses. So government licenses, if I want to operate a radio station, I need to have a license from the Federal Communication Commission, FCC. If I want to open my own business, I need a tax stamp. If I want to sell liquor, I need a liquor license. If I want to pick up someone from the airport, I know Uber and some of these other things are developing, but typically you need a taxi license. If I want to teach in high school or elementary school, I need a teaching license. Now, just for fun, there is no teaching license required for higher education. Instructors in college of higher education were considered subject matter experts, and you're here to learn from us. In high school, teachers were there to teach you. So it's a little bit different. So just as an FYI, there's no teaching license required for higher education. We have to have masters or doctorates in our field and be considered industry experts, but we are not educators. Economies of scale. This is the idea that rather than having multiple companies competing, sometimes it makes more sense to have one big company rather than a bunch of little companies. So the way I like to think about it is these are typically companies with large fixed costs but low marginal costs. So think about a telephone company or cable company or water or sewer. If a city has, I'm going to just say Bloomington, it's a big city, has 100,000 people in it, and a new house is built on the edge of the city, it's relatively cheap to string a cable from the last house to a new house, or to extend the water line or extend the gas line one more, rather than having a second startup cost. So these have very small marginal costs and very large fixed costs. So then you get to the question of, well, how would you regulate this? With a monopoly, generally what they want to do is they want to restrict their output and raise their prices. So one thing that used to exist was what was called a cost plus, where what they would do is they would take the cost and say, we're going to guarantee you a 10% return on your cost. Well, if that's the case, let's pretend it cost me $100,000 to hire one person. If I could do the job with one person, my cost is $100,000, my profit is $10,000. Great, but why wouldn't I just hire another person and have $200,000 in costs, and then I would have $20,000 profit? If my profit is directly linked to my costs, I want to raise my costs as much as I possibly can. So there's some really weird stuff that goes on with regulation of natural monopolies. A natural monopoly is just one where it makes more sense to have one large firm than multiple smaller firms, but the regulation of it becomes really difficult. Okay, so let's draw what a market demand curve is. And here's a market, here's market supply, here's market demand, price, and quantity. What does a monopolist look like? Well, let's first talk about if this is the market. And let's do perfect competition too. So perfect competition takes the price. This was price equals demand equals marginal revenue, and there was some marginal cost curve for perfect competition. What does the monopolist demand curve look like? Well, that's a good question, but it turns out that the firm is the market. They're the only ones there. So the market demand curve is exactly the same as the firm's demand curve because the firm is the market. So given that the market and the firm have the identical demand curve because the firm represents the market, they're the only ones in the market, what it means is that the demand curve is downward sloping. Anytime you have a downward sloping demand curve, it means in order to sell more, you have to lower your price. If you raise your price, you're going to sell less. You have the law of demand working with you. This becomes a huge output, where before in perfect competition, as you sold more, price equaled marginal revenue. Now there's an opportunity cost. Every time you sell more, you're going to lose some existing sales. As a result, the monopolist is called a price searcher. The idea is they can choose somewhere on this demand curve, here's price and quantity, they may choose this price and sell that many, or they may choose a lower price and sell more. They could choose either a certain price, or they could decide how many they want to sell and figure out the most people will buy. They can ask $1 million for their product, but they can't demand it. So I can ask $1 million for my signature, but no one's going to buy it. That idea is that firms can only get out of consumers what they're willing and able to pay. So this is a graph you want to look at carefully. So let's say the original price was $10 and I was selling 2 items. I'm at point A. If I decide I want to lower my price to sell more, well, what happens? I'm losing 25 cents on my existing 2 sales, but I'm gaining a new sale at $9.75. My marginal revenue on that new product is $9.25 because I'm gaining $9.75, but I lost 50 cents on my existing sales. By lowering my price, I have to lower my price on people who would have paid the higher price because this is a single price monopolist. As a result, my marginal revenue is going to be less than my price. There's a trade-off. As I sell more, I have to lower my price on existing customers. As a result, we have a marginal revenue curve that's going to be less than the demand curve. As we just showed, marginal revenue is going to be less than price. So marginal revenue has to be less than the demand curve. For a profit maximizing monopolist, just like everyone, you want to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's going to determine your quantity. Once you have that quantity, now you have to decide, well, how much should I charge people? You may ask a price up here, but there's no way you're going to sell it. The most you can get for this product and still sell your product is you bring it up to the demand curve, and this is what people are willing and able to pay at that price, and that you will sell that many products. Profit maximizing is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and then you bring that quantity up to the demand curve to determine the price you're going to charge. Now, a monopolist is not guaranteed to make profits. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you a monopolist that's making profits and a monopolist that's losing money. In this case, if this is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, so this is your quantity, you bring it up to the demand curve, this is your price. If your price is greater than your average total cost, you're making a profit. Okay, wonderful. So let's pretend I'm making a profit. I showed you on here where total revenue, total cost, and profit is. So let's say I'm making money. What do you want to do? You want to enter the business too. Guess what? You can't. Why? There are high barriers. This is where monopoly ends. I can make a profit, and I can make a profit for a really long time because other people can't get in. This next example is where monopoly is losing money. So how does that work? Again, you produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That determines your quantity. Then you bring that quantity up to the demand curve. That's the most people are going to be willing and able to pay. Then if the price is less than average total cost at that spot, you're losing this amount on each good and you're selling that many goods. So here, the monopoly is losing money. And the firm is losing money. It wants to leave, but there are high barriers. So it can't leave. That's the end. There's no long run in a monopoly. So So a monopolist can have losses for a really long time or can have profits for a really long time. If we're going to compare perfect competition to monopoly, one of the things the book does and other people do is they lay these two graphs on top of each other, but they don't do a real good job of explaining what's going on. In perfect competition, you have marginal cost, which is the same as supply, equals demand. In monopoly, you don't have supply equal demand. For here, you have marginal revenue less than demand. So you're going to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, bring it up to the demand curve. And here you have your price of a monopoly. Well, now if you overlay this first graph with this second graph into this third graph, and you start labeling the spots, we can start to see what's going on. Well, what do we have? Well, on this side, we have consumer surplus here, and we have producer surplus there. This is what consumers were willing to pay. This is how much they had to pay. That's consumer surplus. In monopoly, this is what people were willing to pay. This is what they had to pay. That's consumer surplus. Producer surplus, I'm going to go over that. So this is producer surplus. This is what they were willing to, or what it cost them to produce. This is what they received. This is what it cost them to produce, and they received even more. So that's producer surplus. Now what we're going to do is we are going to use these graphs, but use these graphs on 1 and 2, and now we're going to use these numbers to describe it. So explain to me what's happening in perfect competition. Where is consumer surplus? So I want to know where this graph, this triangle, purple triangle is, using these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it comes out to be 1, 2, and 3. Show me where producer surplus is on perfect competition, where using these numbers overlap, and it's 4 and 5. What we can do is we could see that when we look at perfect competition and monopoly, we could see that consumer surplus got smaller. It used to be 1, 2, and 3. Now it is just 1. So we lost 2 and 3. Well, what does that mean? It means that consumers are definitely worse off because they are now getting less trades and they're paying a higher price. Consumers don't like monopolies. All right, that seems to make sense. What about producers? They went from 4 and 5 to 2 and 4. They gained part 2 and lost part 5. Well, are they better or worse? You could figure it out, but they're better off. Otherwise, if they weren't, they have the option to lower their price and sell more, but they're better off. As a monopolist, you would rather have market power. That makes sense. But now why don't economists like it? Well, we don't like it because we're looking at total surplus. What's good or bad for the economy? And it turns out there's nothing good for the economy here. There's only loss. We're losing 3 and 5. This area right here, this triangle, gets lost and it's dead weight loss. So we call that dead weight loss. And it's the reason why we don't like monopolists. So if you look at it, a monopolist reduces their output and raises their price. Well, okay, that seems to make sense, and it causes dead weight loss. That's the problem with monopolies. So everything we talked about up to this point was really a single price monopolist, which meant that I'm going to charge one price for my entire population. I'm going to sell a product and everyone's going to get the same price. But that isn't always the case. It's a simplified monopoly theory, but we actually see lots of different price discrimination. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about price discrimination, and that's where you just charge different groups or different people different prices for the same product. So it has to be for the same product. So my haircut or my wife's haircut would be a different product because mine costs the firm less money. It's a lot faster than doing a woman's haircut. So some examples are offering a senior citizen discount for coffee at McDonald's. Whether I get it or a senior gets it, it still costs McDonald's the exact same amount. Or student discounts on movies, or the use of coupons for groceries. So these are offering different prices for the same product. So in order to price discriminate, there are 3 requirements. One is the firm can't be in perfect competition. They have to have some ability to change the price. The second thing is that the seller has to be able to distinguish correctly who are the high price value people and who have the less money, because you can't charge students and military the high price on airlines. You need to charge them the lower price. And you also have to have where buyers can't resell. So if I buy an airline ticket, then I can't turn around and sell it to someone at a higher price. It has my name on it. So just a quick note, because this often gets confused by students. Price discrimination is completely legal in the US. So a lot of people hear the word discrimination and they think it's not allowed. But we're not discriminating on race or gender or religion or anything like that. What we're discriminating on are different segments of the population based on their value to purchase a product, if we can distinguish it. So there are three types of discrimination we're going to talk about. One is perfect price discrimination. Again, anytime you see the word perfect, you know it's a theoretical extreme. Perfect is really where buyers come in with a price on their head and the seller knows that you're willing to pay $12.14 for the product. And what the seller is going to do is they're going to charge each person exactly what they're willing and able to pay. They are perfectly going to take over the market. Second degree price discrimination is where you discriminate by quantity. And third degree is where you discriminate by segment. So let's go through these one at a time. So for perfect price discrimination, what I said was that the firm can see exactly what each person is willing and able to pay. So it knows how much that this person is willing to pay, and they're going to charge that person the whole amount. They know what this person is going to pay, and they're going to charge that person the whole amount. They know what this person is going to pay, and they're going to charge them the whole amount. This whole area then becomes producer surplus. Well, if the whole area becomes producer surplus, there's no deadweight loss. As an economist, from a theoretical extreme, we have a distribution problem here, but we can't say that one is worse than the other. The next is discrimination by quantity. Well, how does that work? Let's pretend we're talking about the Xbox. Well, what we can do is we could say, all right, we are going to sell the first batch at $500, and then what's going to happen is the people who value it $500 or more are going to buy the product. And then the firm got that much in producer surplus. Okay, well now they lower the price to $450. Okay, well now the next segment of the population is going to buy it, and now this becomes producer surplus. Then they lower it to $400, and this becomes producer surplus. And this becomes producer surplus. Well, what happens? If I start to color in all the producer surplus, you're going to start to see that there are these extra chunks here, these extra chunks that would have been part of consumer surplus, but are now a part of producer surplus because these members are self-identifying. So as you release it a little bit at a time, those high buyers step forward and say, I want to buy. That's discrimination by quantity. The last one is called discrimination by segment. And what we have here is you can think about an airline. An airplane, they want to discriminate and figure out who are the business travelers and who are the vacation travelers. Why? They're going to figure that the business travelers are these people up here who have more money to spend on airlines, and these people down here are more likely individuals, people. How can they sort these people out? There are a couple ways they can do it. One is they could figure out how many people are flying, but surprisingly, the number one measure is to look at key traits. If you think about it, if you're traveling for business, where do you want to be on a Saturday night? On business, you want to be home. If you're traveling for vacation, where do you want to be on a Saturday night? You want to be away, wherever away is. So if you look at a round trip ticket and try Travelocity or Delta or whatever, and look at an airfare that doesn't cross a Saturday and does cross a Saturday, what they're going to do is they're going to charge a higher price to those who are going to be home on Saturday. So that way what they could do is they could say, okay, well, now this is the price for one part of the segment, and this is the price for the other part of the segment. And now buyers can't resell. The producers just got a little bit more of the consumer surplus.